Hi everybody, this video is about economic welfare. For many economists there's a kind of guiding principle for making normative evaluations of markets, and it basically boils down to this: is economic welfare being maximised at a given level of production and consumption? If the answer is yes, then that's good news. And generally speaking, you would want to leave the market alone to achieve that maximum economic welfare. If, however, the answer is no, then one asks, why is that? And maybe there's good cause to do something about that market, to manipulate it in some way, so that you get closer to maximising economic welfare, if not outright maximising economic welfare. So this little video is about that. It's about, well, what is this thing, economic welfare? We're going to look at this concept through the lens of mainstream neoclassical theory, and what we're going to do is use a simple demand-supply model to illustrate the idea. This implicitly means that we're assuming a perfectly competitive market. Of course, that might not be particularly realistic. But we should bear in mind that from the perspective of this school of thought, you can actually use the concepts that we're going to illustrate here with the supply-demand model to any model in which there are marginal benefit and marginal cost curves. So here we've got a demand curve. This should be familiar to you. Now what we can say about this is that the demand curve is going to reflect the value to a buyer of each unit of a particular product. In this case, our examples are pizzas. And so the value or the marginal benefit will be reflected in the consumer's statement or belief about the highest price that they would be willing to pay for each additional unit. So we can say that this demand curve is effectively a marginal benefit curve. So we'd say, for example, for the 15th unit, this consumer, it's actually the 15,000th pizza actually, is valued at $5. The 10,000th pizza, not 10,000 pizzas, the 10,000th pizza is valued at $10 by the consumer, and the 5,000th pizza is valued at $15 by the consumer. So this is the demand curve, but it's also reflecting the marginal benefits the consumer receives from each additional pizza, the 5,000th, the 10,000th, the 15,000th, etc., and all the points in between those, of course. So let's say that the market price is set at $10 per pizza. The consumer's total value for the 10,000 pizzas is, of course, we don't just be talking about a particular consumer. We could be talking about, the entire market of consumers. But let's say it's an individual consumer. So the total value to the buyer is the total amount of money, the maximum total amount of money they'd be willing to spend in order to acquire those 10,000 pizzas. We know that the total amount that they actually have to pay to get those 10,000 pizzas is this area here. That is the price of the product times the quantity that they're purchasing. So that's the total expenditure by the consumer. So we've got the total value to the buyer and the total amount of money that they pay to acquire that value. What we can see is there's some portion of that total value greater than the expenditure which the consumer receives from this trade. We call this amount of the total value the consumer or buyer surplus. And this is the consumer's economic welfare, but just the consumer's economic welfare. Now let's turn to the producer. So in the case of the supply curve, which in a perfectly competitive world is reflected in the marginal costs of production, we say that the marginal cost will reflect the lowest price that the seller is willing to accept for each unit. Obviously, they wouldn't accept a price lower than the marginal cost of producing the product. So the supply curve is effectively the marginal cost curve for the market as a whole, if we're talking about all the consumers, all the firms, or if this is just the supply curve of a single firm, the marginal costs of that single firm. So again, we can see for the fifth unit, or the 5,000th unit really, 5,000th unit produced, the marginal cost of that is $5. The 10,000th unit costs $10. The 15,000th unit costs $15. Let's say, again, the market price is set at $10 per pizza. Now, the total revenue that will be received by the seller for the 10 units will be this area here. The price that they receive for selling the units multiplied by the number of units that they sell. However, we have to bear in mind that this area here reflects the sum of the marginal cost of producing those 10,000 units, which means the portion of the total revenue that is greater than the sum of the marginal costs, this area here, this blue area, is what we call the producer or the seller surplus. This is the producer's or the seller's economic welfare. Kind of mirrors the consumer's economic welfare. Okay, so now let's put them together. We've got our market equilibrium, where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. The supply curve is reflecting the marginal cost of each additional pizza. The demand curve is reflecting the marginal benefit or value of each additional pizza to the consumer. So we can say that the efficient quantity of pizzas being produced is at equilibrium. We say these 10 units are allocatively efficient, that's the correct quantity, because the marginal benefit of the 10th pizza is just equal to the marginal cost of producing that 10th pizza. Beyond that, the marginal cost, if we went to 15 pizzas, the marginal cost of the 15th pizza would be greater than the marginal benefit of the 15th pizza. From the perspective of the market as a whole, that would not be a rational or allocatively efficient quantity to produce and consume. Anyway, now remember our concepts of consumer and producer surpluses. Our consumer surplus is the sum of all the highest prices the consumer is willing to pay for these pizzas up to 10,000 pizzas and above the price that they have to pay for those pizzas. This is the consumer surplus. The producer surplus, on the other hand, is the revenue that the producers receive over and above the marginal cost of each additional unit of output produced, up to 10,000 pizzas. So we've got the producer and the consumer surplus, and together they give us the total economic surplus being generated in this market. Now, assuming these curves are fixed, they're not moving around for some reason or other, there's no way that we can increase the total economic welfare area overall. Maybe it's conceivable we could somehow increase the consumer surplus, but only by taking away some of the producer surplus, and vice versa. The point is that the total economic welfare area, that's large triangle here, can't be made any bigger given the curves as they are. We would say then that economic welfare is being maximized. In this case, you can see it's being maximized at the point of equilibrium, where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. We should note, however, that this does not necessarily mean that the market is morally justified in staying here, that this is a morally justified price and quantity. It might be, for some people, they might say that my criterion of ethics is if economic welfare is being maximized, that's the most desirable, morally desirable outcome. However, others might say, well, this is not necessarily a fair division of the economic welfare, or a just division of the economic welfare. In fact, you could ask questions about whether the product itself should be produced at all. I mean, in this case, it's pizzas, so they're relatively innocuous, but what if it were cigarettes or crack cocaine or nuclear weapons or something like that? You might say, well, I have moral qualms about the product itself. And so the market maybe should be abolished altogether, for example. Anyway, this analysis, where we're just focusing on economic welfare, says nothing about those kinds of questions. So here we've got our total economic welfare area. Now, if for some reason or other less than 10 units were bought and sold, then we would say that economic welfare would not be maximized, and that there would be at least a notional loss of economic welfare. We'd call that loss a dead weight loss. So, for example, if for some reason the amount being produced and consumed was not 10 but rather was 5, then first we can say that at 5 units, or 5,000 units of output, that the marginal benefit is not any longer equal to the marginal cost. And thus we know, by definition pretty much, that this can't possibly be an allocatively efficient outcome, because an allocatively efficient outcome is where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. So, if we're only producing up to 5 units, what about this part of the economic welfare area? Well, that just disappears. Obviously, you don't derive, neither producers nor consumers can derive economic welfare from something which was never produced or consumed. So this part of the economic welfare area is lost. This is a dead weight loss. And we can clearly see that means that the remaining total economic welfare area, actual economic welfare area, is smaller than if the market were producing at the point where demand equals supply. On the other hand, you can imagine a scenario where more, for some reason or other, we don't have to go into why right now, but for some reason or other, more than 10 units are being bought and sold in the market. In this case, again, economic welfare would not be maximized. There would again be a notional loss of economic welfare, that is, a dead weight loss. So we produce all the way up to, the market produces all the way up to 10 units. So we've we've climbed all the way up to the top of this economic welfare triangle. We've filled out the entire economic welfare triangle, so we've maximised economic welfare. But what if then for some reason the market produced more than that? Who knows why? Well, we would have gone beyond the point where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. We would have kept producing so that now the marginal cost of the 15th unit, and everything after the 10th unit really, the marginal cost of the 15th unit is greater than the marginal benefit of the 15th unit. Here we've gone into negative economic welfare territory. This is negative economic welfare. We can call that a deadweight loss. And if we wanted to, we could take this negative economic welfare and deduct it from the positive economic welfare. So we flip it. And so we cut off some of the actual economic welfare, deduct it. This is, again, the deadweight loss. We've just mirrored it, that's all. So again, the actual economic welfare area, the yellow area here now, is clearly less than the total economic welfare area would have been if we had stuck to the equilibrium quantity.